When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject, David. User, 819CANE. Posted, March 2nd, 1997.
Ask most Sacramento area historians what the oldest apartment building in the city is, and they're going to tell you Wheeler Row, which isn't entirely wrong. After Sutter Line burned down in 1975, Wheeler Row officially became the oldest, and because Sutter had such a strange, complex history, efforts were made to scrub it from the historical record entirely. How do I know this? Because Sutter was home to no fewer than 6 generations of my family, going all the way back to 1871, and I was living in it when it went up in flames. Or rather, I should say, in the interest of honesty, when David burned it to the ground. I was an only and lonely child. My dad lost his marbles to the family curse when I was just a baby, so Grandpa had him committed to a facility in Oregon where he could be safe and we could be safe from him. Mom worked long hours for Grandpa's firm, and that left me alone a lot in Sutter Line. Our family took up most of the building, so it's not like I was completely abandoned to my devices, but my cousins were rambunctious kids, whereas I preferred quietly playing with my blocks. That's how I met David. David looked to be about my age, but I couldn't say for sure as he never spoke. In fact, I don't even know for sure how I came to learn his name. But he would sit across from me on the floor and we would build things together, and to this day, I still consider him one of my best friends, despite everything that happened. His silence was never a problem, nor was the strange way he dressed. I could never put my finger on what was off about it. He just didn't wear clothes in the same style as me or anyone else I knew. No one ever asked me about him, so I never brought him up, and we went on this way for 2 years. As time went on, David withdrew from our games. My family has always been heavy smokers, and after get-togethers would leave behind big piles of matches on our kitchen table. David began to take more of an interest in those than the blocks. He would bring a handful of matchbooks into my room and light them in front of me, his eyes transfixed by the dancing flame. They would burn right down to his fingertips, but never seemed to cause him any discomfort. He would simply drop them on the carpet between his legs. That's how the first fire started. The whole thing is kind of hazy now, but I remember how quickly flames crawled across the thick shag carpet toward me. It was hard to believe it was really happening, that I wasn't watching Towering Inferno or some movie of the week. The only thing I recall clearly is how intense the heat of the fire was. Pain came later. If my Uncle Mike hadn't been coming upstairs to visit, something that was out of character for him, and he told me years later had come because of a bad feeling, I might not have made it out of there at all. Our apartment was destroyed, and of course I was blamed. My mom became even more distant, and my cousins started whispering under their breath when they saw me. Grandpa moved us to one of the empty apartments on the third floor, and I never saw David again. Despite him almost costing my life, I missed my friend and wondered why he couldn't just come down a few floors to see me. Before the fire, I didn't have any interest in playing with my cousins. Now, after it, they gave me a wide berth. That all changed 3 months later when a second fire, originating in our old apartment, gutted the entire complex. When it happened, I was on the second floor having dinner with Uncle Mike and Aunt Nancy. We were halfway through the chicken piccata when the fire alarm went off, and it was impossible to miss the sideways glance from Aunt Nancy. They couldn't blame me this time. I'd been with them all day. Our initial hope that this was some kind of false alarm was crushed the second we stepped out into the hallway. Thick black smoke was everywhere, more and more seeming to pour out of the events. Uncle Mike banged on the doors that were still closed, and together some 20 of us moved down the stairs and out to the muster point opposite our building. David must have learned his lesson on the first go-round, because this time there was no stopping it. From where we stood across the street, we could plainly see the top floor already completely engulfed. By the time the fire department arrived, there was nothing they could do except to watch it burn. The building was distant enough from any neighboring structures that there was no risk of the fire spreading, so we all stood there watching our home go up in smoke. Fire investigators later determined the fire had again started in my old bedroom, but I could have told them that. They bothered to ask. How? Because as I stood there with my aunt and uncle, a warm summer breeze whipping around me, I watched David wave from my bedroom window. The second fire was enough to convince the family I had nothing to do with the first. No one said anything specifically, but they stopped collectively treating me like I was my father's son. Eventually, when I turned 16, my grandfather brought me into the business, and I learned a great deal about the history of Sutherline. History that exists only in our files now, and for good reason. I learned that David never lived in the building, but he spent his final days there, if you catch my meaning. He was far from the only one. The family curse is called that for a reason, and it seems as though there wasn't always a place in Oregon to send someone to. Back in the old days, the family just made accommodations, the kind with shovels and quick lime. I like to think we've moved past all that no one in my family now is capable of those things. We treat the curse instead of indulging it or trying to cover it up. At least, I hope we do. You see now why I still consider David my friend, why I don't begrudge him what he did.
Subject, just keep talking. User, TT000. Posted, May 14th, 1998.
Have you ever dreamed something so intensely you're sad when you wake up and realize it was never real? That's where I'm at today. Last night, I dreamed about my favorite band, a 70s rock trio called Just Keep Talking, getting back together. In their heyday, they sounded like Bruce Springsteen and Janis Ian had a baby that didn't play well with others. They had a huge US hit in 1975 called Exile of the Heart, which everybody knows, then a couple other songs like Together Again and Micronesia that didn't chart in the US but did big numbers overseas. The band was made up of 2 women and a man, Sherry V, Cherry K, and Big Jim Rollins, plus a couple of session players depending on the record. Their hot streak ended in 1982 with their album Honey Bell. It wasn't that the album tanked, far from it. The record was heavily influenced by the LA punk scene. Guys like X and Social Distortion, and Micronesia was a minor hit off the back of that sound. It was a simple 3-chord number with a basic chorus, but it managed to connect with their core audience who'd been around since Exile, as well as the punk kids. Who needs ya? Who needs ya? I'd rather be in Micronesia. From what I gather, it was relationship stuff that torpedoed them. Big Jim and Sherry started hooking up, and Cherry was fine with it. Then the two split, and things were still copacetic. It was when Jim started hooking up with Cherry and freezing out Sherry that it got ugly. When she'd finally had enough, she hit the self-destruct button. The deal with their label had been all of us or none of us, so Honeybell went gold and Just Keep Talking was no more. Hopeless romantic that I am, hearing Exile of the Heart was like taking some kind of drug specially formulated just for me. Baby, you always said I was crazy, and we both know that it's true, but I've never been so crazy as I've been without you. In case you change your mind, I've saved you a seat at the bar. Your outpatient expatriate and his Exile of the Heart. In the dream, the reunion was going to take place in a little town in Pennsylvania at a music festival. I remember a yellow stage being constructed in the town square, small brick buildings lining the streets on either side. Wooden chairs, like you'd find in a school, were lined up in front, waiting for the crowds who were so eager to hear their favorite band back together again. Except, it didn't happen. Jim and Cherry had separated a few years after the band split, but putting all three of them back together in the same space, it was obvious time hadn't healed any wounds. They started connecting, the strength of their dynamic again pushing Sherry away, keeping her at arm's length. She was furious, but more than anything, she was hurt. I heard her call them both motherfuckers before storming out of the coffee shop that was serving as the makeshift green room. That was the point when I woke up to the first rays of morning streaming between the slats of my bedroom blinds. After getting my bearings, it dawned on me that the whole reunion had been a figment of my imagination. I had to deal with the disappointment of my favorite band's first gig in 20 years falling apart in front of me, followed by the realization it had never been a possibility in the first place. What a kick in the nuts. The clock on my nightstand said it was just about 6 a.m, time to get up for work. With a groan, I heaved myself out of bed and started my morning routine. The whole time, Exile just wouldn't leave my head, and I decided the only solution was to throw it on while my coffee perked. I padded into the den, running my fingers along the spines of my record collection, my prized possession, if I'm honest. So many people tossed out their records when CDs came along, and they're all idiots. Mark my words, LPs will make a comeback. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. Oddly, I couldn't find JKT's Exile album. It wasn't on the shelf or the turntable or anywhere else. Had I lent it to someone? It was possible, but unlikely. Time was short, so I figured the hunt for it could wait until I got home in the evening. Together Again would have to do for now. Except I couldn't find it either. Or Honeybell. I racked my brain for a good 5 minutes before the hammer came down. Just Keep Talking had only ever existed in that dream. The whole band, every record, every bit of trivia I'd had stashed away in my head when I woke up this morning, none of it had ever existed in the real world. It was like losing a family member. I know that sounds extreme, but try to see it from my point of view. Imagine if you woke up tomorrow and not only did your favorite band not exist, but never had. every memory of them in your head hadn't been there the night before. It was all a tapestry woven behind your eyes as you slept. I can't play music, let alone write it, so those songs couldn't have come from me, yet I can still hear them floating around my head like ghosts in a haunted house.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.